Now it'll switch to us. So here, this is going to. Okay, we're about 2 minutes late. I want to begin by welcoming everybody to the October 2022 Eldorado Hills Area Planning Advisory Committee meeting. I'm John Davey, the chair. On my left is John Resler, vice chair. On my right, Tim White, vice chair. And I'm trying to look and see my list here if Brook is in, and I don't see Brook, but Brook is another one of our officers. She's secretary for APAC, and I don't see her in attendance yet. She might roll in a little bit later. So begin again by welcoming everybody here to the meeting. Tonight we have a couple of presentations from supervisors, from county directors from different departments. We do have Rafael Martinez scheduled as our main guest. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here tonight. He had an emergency. They had a video presentation that they sent along to me today, and I tested it elsewhere. It worked fine. It's not playing for us here tonight. So I might work on this while the meeting's going on and we're hearing some things. So I do want to hear the meeting. If I can get it to work, we'll play the video here. If not, we'll post it to our YouTube channel and on our webpage. And then that way people can hear. It's about a 15-minute video. And Rafael is going to talk about the subject matters that we had asked him to speak to tonight. So apologize in advance for that, but we hope everything's okay with Rafael, and appreciate that he's always willing to be here. And we're already looking for when he can come here next. So, I like to remind people that when we have county employees here or county staff, elected officials, that they're here at the end of a long day like we are. And they're still doing their job. We're just doing our resident thing. So with that, let's go ahead and kick off the meeting. First thing we do is we call the meeting to order. And I guess I should probably find my presentation file while we're talking. And sorry about this. And we're almost there. 2 machines, hard to drive everything at once. So, and where are we? Here we go. So now you can see that. Okay. The first order of business called a meeting to order. Again, I'd introduce our officers. The next item is, let's see, we'll go here. Adoption of our meeting agenda. And if there's no objections here from our officers, you guys are gents. Thank you for that. And then the beginning of our meeting, we have an opportunity for public comment for anything that's not on our agenda tonight. And so we'll hit the room first if there's any comments, and then we offer that same opportunity to people that are here virtually via Zoom. If you're here via Zoom, go ahead and hit the raise hand button so I can see what's going on. And we'll call on you after we've gone through the room. We do ask if you can provide your name. You're not required to, but if you would, that would be great. So I'm going to look here at our list. I don't see any hands going up online. So in the room, are there any questions tonight or public comments that anybody in the room would like to make? Okay. You guys are pretty easy. See if I can get this to go. Okay. So with that, we'll jump ahead one. Our first opportunity tonight is we hear from Supervisor Heidoff. Do you have your microphone there? I do. And he provides supervisor communications. And again, questions come up, and we talked with John. John's Eldorado Hills is 3 districts, of course. And we do send the invitation for the meeting to all 3 supervisors. Actually, we send them to all 5 supervisors. So there is an opportunity for a district supervisor that touches Eldorado Hills, that wants to come. They can come and talk as long as there's not 3 of them. And you're not discussing, so we want to respect the Brown Act. So with that, John, thank you. And you got your microphone, take it away.
Yeah, so I'm going to be brief. The latest presentation that was made to the Board of Supervisors Tuesday was a really thorough review of the process used for code enforcement. Because the board has established an emphasis on getting back to doing rigorous code enforcement, and particularly with VHRs up in the Tahoe Basin and other areas. And it always been somewhat in question with a lot of the board members of how does that process really work? Because as individual board members, we get calls from constituents. They're complaining because code enforcement is out and telling them they have to do something on their property. They don't have a permitted improvement that's been made, whatever it is. And so that presentation I thought was very well put together. And I want to thank Karen Garner because that's under her jurisdiction. And So we've had two significant presentations by planning and building recently. The second one on code enforcement, I think will help people who are not familiar with the process understand it. But the primary emphasis the board is putting on it is that we need to make sure that the public safety and health provisions of the county are preserved. And a lot of situations where we found where people didn't get a building permit to do an addition on their property, on their home, on their garage, whatever it is. And without the building permit, sale of that property has occurred a couple different times from one owner to another owner. And then finally it's recognized, well, this additional 200, 400 square feet, whatever addition was never permitted. And the difficulty with that is we don't know the quality of the construction that was done when it was built because there was no inspection process. So you don't know if they established the proper shear wall, if you don't know if the electrical was done to code. And so in order to bring it into a permittable status, we have code enforcement and go out and talk to the residents, issue notice that they need to correct the situation. And we try to be as flexible as we can. We're not trying to bring bad news, but we really need to let them know that we have a situation here that the county has recognized. And all the code enforcement stuff that we do is based upon a complaint. We're not out cruising the streets. Some of you are familiar with probably the CCNR enforcement the CSD has. We're not out cruising the street looking for things. If we get a written complaint from a resident, a neighbor, whoever it is, then we have an obligation to go out and look at it. But the whole intent is to get the problem remedied, get it corrected. And so they went through some of the processes you can do to get the remedy done. And it's always going to be difficult, particularly when whatever it was that wasn't permitted was done 2 or 3 owners or a single owner away, right? And you bought the property and it has the current value, but now you're faced with the situation. You have to do something to bring it under code. So those are difficult talks, but where we can, we're trying to be lenient. We're trying to say, as long as we see progress being made, we're not going to hound you, but we need to see continuous progress. So tell us what your plans are. We can help assist you in determining alternatives you have, but we need to get this into a compliance mode. So that's the primary thing that was presented. We went through the staffing, code enforcement, and we've got some really good people in code enforcement now that are really attentive to what's going on. And we're trying to teach them the skills of working with the public and not, going in and saying, well, you got a problem here, you got to go fix it. It's you're non-compliant. We have to find a way to bring you into compliance. So work with us, help us. We can provide the resources to the extent we can, but ultimately there's going to be a cost involved in most cases to bring these things under compliance. And that's part of the difficulty. But for anyone that's interested, we ask that the segment of the video from the meeting that dealt with the code enforcement presentation be captured and then put on our planning and building website under the code enforcement flag. So anybody that wants to hear the interaction between the board, listen to the presentation, because there was a lot of Q&A that went with it. You can't typically get to that level if you have a frequently asked questions type of page. And so that video, I'm not sure if it's out there yet, but that was the plan, is to get the video posted so that it's not just reading page after page of stuff. It's really just listening to the conversation, looking at the presentation, and then recognizing there's an obligation to get things corrected. So that was the latest presentation that was done. And I thought it was extremely well done. The previous presentation dealt with where we are with our planning and building organization and what it's taking in terms of trying to recruit personnel to fill the vacancies, what we're doing to try to reduce the backlog in several different areas. And that, again, was a good discussion that happened with the board. So again, under Karen's oversight. And so that's the basic thing I wanted to report tonight. And if there's any questions on that or anything else that I can answer, I'm certainly open and willing to do that.
Okay. Well, thank you, John. Let's hit the room first. If there are any questions for Supervisor Heidel, or anything that he talked about, or any questions you have. Well, I should have excluded someone, but go ahead. Turn your hootenanny on here. There you go.
My question is, how does code enforcement work with a community like Four Seasons that have their own rules and regulations, or Heritage? How does that work?
Okay, so code enforcement doesn't do CCNR enforcement. It's totally different category. What we're looking at is where there's a violation of a building code, where there's an unpermitted use of the property. where somebody has started up a vacation home rental, but it's not, doesn't have the business license for that, or they're not in compliance with the noise considerations because the neighbors are complaining. So there's different jurisdictions within any given community. CCNRs are kind of the overriding controlling mechanisms, but the county also has county codes primarily derived from what the state imposes upon us that we have to go out and enforce. So if there is a complaint filed by somebody in Four Seasons, for instance, it's a gated community, the individual who the complaint is against is who code enforcement would contact. And they would basically make an arrangement to come out and review the property, basically do an assessment and perhaps even write up the violation at that point in time, perhaps, come back and have to look at some of the documents to determine, is this really a violation? Some things are marginal and it's not real always black and white. So that's one of the difficulties we have. But the homeowners association, for instance, the CCNR, of course, they would not get involved. It'd be an individual owner of the property and the county in general, unless it's a broader issue, right? And I can't imagine what one of those would be that would be community-wise, but could be.
I always thought that the community CCNRs are based upon, I guess, the codes of the county, like they take it from the county.
Typically not.
CCNRs are a private agreement between homeowners.
Okay.
And then to further complicate it, the HOA has rules in addition that the CCRs are usually incorporated into. But typically though, when projects are approved, CCNRs are, I don't want to look at you, sorry, the CCNRs are included as part of the development. And then that's an agreement between the people who eventually purchase or who operate, depending on.
Right. So let me give you an example where it kind of crosses both boundaries, because we've had some of these. Somebody has the idea they're going to start raising chickens in their backyard, right? And so they bring the fowl in, and obviously there's generally noises that are made and other things. And so CCNRs generally restrict certain types of fowl within the property. In rare cases, they might allow it if it's a great big, 5-acre parcel or something, but generally smaller residential communities don't allow having fowl within your property. So if that was the case, it would be a CCNR violation in all likelihood. It would also, based upon a complaint, perhaps be a violation of the county code. And it depends on where the fowl are kept and whether or not they have been modified so they don't make noise, like the roosters. You can have roosters that have been modified that don't crow, I guess. Of course, it's not very attractive to girls, but there's things like that then code enforcement has to look at as what is the right remedy if the CCNRs don't go to the right level. So it's really a combination of things, but ultimately the CCNRs are totally separate, as John pointed out. It's really trying to maintain the values of the property and control activities that would be a nuisance within the community. They're really looking more at noise.
Boats in your driveway.
Right, events, yeah.
RVs parked in the street.
Commercial vehicles parked on the street, those kinds of things, yeah.
Thank you, John.
Yep. Yes.
I'm gonna bring back to you.
This one.
There you go.
Say sometimes, oftentimes CCNRs are more restrictive. There may be some overlap, like you were talking about vehicles parked or even with chickens. And we in code enforcement will actually sort of lean on the HOA to enforce the CCNRs because they're more restrictive. For example, say someone has 10 chickens, we might allow, to have 5, but they have 10, the CCNR say 0. Well, we're going to go out there and make them get rid of 5 chickens. The next door neighbor is still going to be unhappy. So we're going to push on the HOA to enforce because they're usually more restrictive, and that's the expectation of the neighbors is whatever are in their CCNRs.
Do you have a microphone near you so that the people online can hear you?
I'm curious about a homeowner who does an addition to his home and doesn't get a permit, but it does it to code. What happens then? The inspectors come out, said everything looks fine, pay your permit fees, and we're good to go.
That works fine. The problems can arise though because they have to be brought up to current code, other than the structural piece. So if it was something that was built, even 5 years ago, now to bring it up to current code, you're gonna have to add solar, you're gonna have to add fire sprinklers. So that's where, yeah. And that's the state that requires that.
There are elements such as, if you have so many square feet that you've added, well, now you're subject to school impact fees, transportation impact fees, the TIF fees, the various departments and agencies that, So yeah, when you're bringing it up, it's, and that's why a lot of people, when they do like a room addition, they keep it at 400 feet. I can't remember. I'll blank on it, but they limit the size of their addition. Yeah. Hey, Ron, you want to push that button on there?
I got one right here.
Oh, cool.
So if I buy the house, I don't know that that room addition is even an addition because it's done so well. What is the legal remedy? I mean, from what I'm hearing, I'm responsible because I bought the house. Someone makes a complaint for some reason and county checks records and there's no record of that extra bedroom and bathroom. So what's my legal responsibility and therefore my legal remedy?
This was actually a conversation that the board and staff talked about quite a bit. So the board directed us to look at what's called an amnesty program. That would help in certain regard, meaning you can, an amnesty program might be where you can come and get it permitted. We won't charge you permit fees. The rub is, again, whatever upgrades you might have to do, we can't cover the cost of you having to do the solar and the fire sprinklers and bringing it into current code. So your remedy really right now is you can file a civil lawsuit potentially against previous owners or possibly even the real estate agent because those things are supposed to be disclosed when you buy a house. Yeah, but that gets challenging too if we're talking 3 owners ago that were the ones that put in that addition. So that is something the board directed us to look at and to maybe develop some possible remedies for that.
The history of buildings in this county go back quite a ways. So the permitting, there are breakdowns in the record keeping from 100 years ago. But even there's a resident who asked me, I went to 2018. The county doesn't have any of my building permits, and it's a house in Park Village that was built in 1960, whatever. I don't know. Are there any place else those records might be? They're not. I don't have them. So yeah.
The one thing we also talked about was the county assessor's office assesses improvements on property. Right? They say you've got a half-acre lot, you got a 2,000 square foot home, and that's what you're paying taxes on. And then it comes up for sale on the market. Instead of being a 3-bedroom, it's a 4-bedroom and 2,400 square feet. Well, how did that add at 400 square feet? Automatically get applied when it hasn't been taxed and there's nothing in the record. Knowingly have not had that permitted to avoid paying taxes, our county council basically said that constitutes tax fraud. So there's other ramifications we can get into. So, and it's as simple as things like decks. A lot of people think, well, I'm just going to build a little deck here off the back. I don't have to get a permit for that. Now, unfortunately, the decks have to be permitted. So you just have to be very knowledgeable, and if in doubt, call the planning building department and ask them. I want to add a deck on the backyard, only weigh 200 square feet, do I need a permit? And they will tell you the answer. The answer is yes, you do, particularly if it's elevated.
Yeah.
Because now you have a structural, earthquake-proof structure, cross members, shear panels, that type of stuff. Different right down on the ground typically, but everything is a unique situation. If in doubt, the best thing to do is ask before you down that road.
Can I ask something? Isn't that usually part of an inspection that you ask for before you buy property?
Not always. There is an inspection required, but they don't necessarily get to the level of looking at all that information. The real estate agent is ultimately responsible for making sure that they do their due diligence and reviewing what the property is offered and has everything been done consistent with that. The inspector is probably only going to come out and look Are there defects and cracks in the foundation that need to be repaired? Is there something, the deck is bad, it needs to be replaced, those kinds of things. I don't think they're gonna get into looking at the county documentation. Karen may know more about it, but I think that's where it kind of stops, so.
Because I know with my experience back in New York, they would look for that. They would look to see if you have a permit for that porch or that deck or an extra, let's say, an extra way to vent your washing machine and your whatever and whatever, okay? They would go into that nitty gritty on that.
A lot of that goes back to the real estate agent. Just recently, I had the same thing. The real estate agent was the one that was exactly all the permits for the home, had everything, the HOA, the original lot lines, the surveyor's information. That all goes back to your real estate agent because they can be held, liable as well. So that's helped out quite a bit.
Okay, thank you, Mel.
I would say the inspections too, that might give you a clue that something is not permitted. If they say, hey, this deck doesn't have the right, bracing or footings or whatever, that's probably a pretty good clue that that deck may not have been permitted, because if it had been permitted and inspected by the county, that would have been caught.
So we do have Robert Williams who's online, and his hand is up. I asked him to unmute. Jump on in there, Robert.
Thank you. I do have a code enforcement, real life code
I don't know.
enforcement question.
I cannot hear you. Hold on a second. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you
Hold
hear
on.
me?
Check the screen here. Please stand by.
Okay.
How about that, Robert? Can you hear you now?
I can hear you, but can you hear me?
You are crystal clear now. Thank you.
Yeah. Good news. I have a real world current zoning enforcement question pertaining to the recently opened Heritage Park. And I'm asking because a number of residents here have submitted to enforcement issues regarding noise, lighting, and other items pertaining to that park. And to this date, basically, code enforcement has told us to go back to CSD to resolve the issue. Yet we have no evidence that all the permits have been put in place. And where do we as residents, what recourse do we have with code enforcement if there's a reluctance to enforce issues that are very evidently in violation of code?
I know that we were going to sort of highlight that later, but if you have something brief you can contribute right now.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
So in the case of the park, yeah, that is a little unique in that there's multiple parties involved, but in that case, there is a issue with the electrical permit. So things that are in that park related to electrical are still at issue. Other stuff with that park, the landscaping, the fixtures, the sidewalks, everything else, those permits are okay. So
Where can we see those permits? Because as of last week, they were not available to the public to inspect or view those permits. How do we get access?
I can find those for you, sure.
Okay. And I'm sorry, you didn't introduce yourself. I'm Bob Williams, by the way, and you're?
Oh, she's a guest speaker for later. This is Karen
Okay,
Garner. She's Director of Building and Planning.
Oh, is this Karen?
Sitting here in the-
Oh,
she's
well,
in the
nice
audience.
meeting you, Karen. And I'll follow back up with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. And then Brook had her hand up as well. So Brook, go ahead and unmute.
Hi there. Thank you. I just had a kind of a related comment or question. So I know you had brought up that, maybe possible recourse against a builder or a seller or a realtor. And I understand the disclosure laws, but in Eldorado County, we're one of the last counties to put our legal documents online. They're still not available online, nor are cases available online. And that's one of the ways that you would gain knowledge if there was some kind of dispute regarding the home and or home or build or whatever you're doing. And I was just curious if what you're doing with code enforcement, what we're doing with permits, if that can run hand in hand, where the county can get the access to the online court records, because that would be really helpful, especially for homeowners and looking and seeing, was there prior action? Was there a disclosure? Was there something going on with their property?
You know, I don't know if we have an answer for that. It's just part of the process that it seems that we're trying to evolve the process and make things a little more efficient and have those things more interconnected.
Well, I can give a little bit more information. There was a conversion that was supposed to happen over a year ago with court records and files, and there's been a problem with it. Some kind of glitch, and I don't know that there's been an update to the public. I just see it on a daily basis because that's what I do. And I was just curious if we're getting some online access to permits and we're getting online access to different records, is that something that can go hand in hand, or is there an update as to why that part of it's not being, I guess, done?
I mean, I think I can answer part of it if I understand it correctly. Permits information is available. You create an account through Track It and can get information. Court records is completely outside of my department and I don't have any control over that. So that would be totally different than what I can provide.
Right, but as you're doing enforcement and you're working with the different individuals and how you remedy, and part of that program that you would be doing, and I apologize, I don't remember the exact term that was used, but for individuals who are trying to bring their home up current, I think that would kind of go into one of the recourses or remedies would be to see, was there a disclosure? Who actually built the home? Some of those records, especially in the tract housing that went in Serrano and other parts of Eldorado Hills, all of that information and prior lawsuits and what was disclosed or not disclosed is available in the court records. It just, I think it would be interesting if that is incorporated somehow into the programming and the programs that you're developing with the board.
Yeah, so probably the answer tonight is that no, it does exist and it probably hasn't been explored, but maybe it's something to be developed in the future as these processes are refined.
It's really a question for county council, and that's what we have to do.
Okay.
Yeah, John, maybe you could kind of look into it, because I know there's been a huge delay, and all those records used to be available, and then they took them offline about over a year and a half ago as they're converting to a new system, and we can't get them back.
I was not aware of that, but I will. I'll talk to county council about it, see the information I can get.
That would be great, because people can see they can actually get permit records and what was filed with the county, especially if it's not in Traxit, through those legal documents.
Very good.
Thank you.
Okay, Brooke. Ellison, you have your hand up. It's so good to hear from you.
Yes.
Go ahead.
It's a technical matter. I can hear the people on Zoom quite clearly. I can scarcely hear anything that's going on in the room there. Is that just me?
Well, we can't hear what you're hearing. I got the microphone close to me now. Can you hear me now?
Yes, not
Okay.
very well, but
We will endeavor to hold the microphones close to us when we start talking. I don't know if there's something we can change here in the room,
all
but
right.
we'll make a better effort. Thank you for pointing it out for us, Allison.
Thank you.
Okay, so with that went a long way. Sorry, John. Sorry, Karen. With that, I'm going to go ahead and move ahead. So we did have tonight, if I can find it. There it goes. And boom. So Rafael Martinez, Director of the County Transportation Department, was going to make a presentation tonight. I said I was going to hold this closer. A presentation this evening, mostly focused on some of the ways that money comes into the county for the Transportation Department, what the Transportation Department handles in terms of how many miles of roads. It's an enormous amount of road network that the county has to maintain. And then sort of the funding behind all those different elements and how it's sort of divided and how, monies that go for TIM fees are specific for one purpose and capital improvement dollars go a different way, but the road maintenance fee is a unique challenge in our county. Raphael's presentation is about 15 minutes. I have the video here. We can't play it here and get the sound to work. So I apologize right now for that. And I apologize to Raphael's assistant, Kelly, who worked really hard today to get that to me before I left the house tonight. And I did test it like on 4 different machines and it worked fine, but just the, it's not the matter of the volume here. It's what I tried to test it across the network and it's not playing, and we wouldn't hear it here anyway. So it's just tough. So, so I'm going to apologize for that. What we might do is if people here in the room want to sit down and listen to it, we can try to put it on and see if people can hear it at home. We'll do it at the end of the meeting. Just let's get through our other stuff here and then we'll experiment at the end. But I apologize to Raphael. And Raphael had an emergency tonight and he just couldn't be here. And they went out of their way to try to provide something for us tonight. We will post the video along with our meeting video to both our YouTube channel and on our website. So those elements of Raphael's presentation will be here. And Raphael's already talked about coming back for other discussions that we had a list of questions that we had for him. And he wasn't gonna be able to get to all of them tonight, but he wanted to participate and be engaged. And so they mentioned we started our meeting. It's late evening for all of us here as residents. The county staff, when they come down here, they're still doing their job when they're coming here doing this. So we always appreciate their participation. Sharing the information is important for our community. You're not going to see it on TV and you're not going to see it. You see it in the Mountain Democrat maybe, but you're not going to hear it on the radio. So we appreciate the amount of participation that we get. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead because we've been using her time all evening before we even really got here. So Karen Garner is here tonight. She's the director of the Planning and Building Department. I'm going to start her presentation and then you can give me verbal cues here tonight and I will advance the slides. Let me get that thing loaded up. Almost there. Went too far. And let's try this now. And sorry. And away we go. So thank you, Karen.
All right, thank you. So yes, I'm Planning and Building Director. You can go ahead into the next slide. So although planning and building are the 2 main components, my department actually oversees several other programs, including code enforcement that we were just talking about, economic development, airports, cemeteries. We've got commercial cannabis, and then I actually have staff up in Tahoe who do some of the specialized planning, if you will, that it takes place up in Tahoe, as well as stormwater, which is countywide, and our vacation home rental program, which is countywide. But Brendan, who oversees the Tahoe operations, he's in charge of those programs. So a lot of stuff going on, and then planning and building divisions, they are further broken down into other divisions, both of which have a function that we call permit center. And so what I'm going to talk about for the next few minutes is largely centered around that activity of the permit center, because that's where, whether it's building or planning, if you're getting a permit, that's kind of where you start off with. So on the next slide, I'm going to first focus on our building side of the house and just looking at some numbers. So the first one is over the past 4 fiscal years, how many applications have we received? And so that gives you an idea of the volume. This past fiscal year was almost 14,000. Keep in mind that includes everything from a water heater to a re-roof, to a new deck, to a new home, to a new commercial, to a tenant improvement in a commercial. It's a lot of different things. So that all goes into that 14,000 number. We did see a jump there, and I'm actually doing a deeper dive. I don't have the answer for you. Largely, it's just the demand in homes that caused probably that jump in the past year. But I'm taking a deeper dive into that to look exactly why we jumped from 10,500 to almost 14,000, and make sure I understand that. The next slide shows a snapshot in time. If I look at the end of every fiscal year, how many permits were in process, meaning we've looked at them, we've taken them in, but they're either still being plan checked or, there's some place in our process. There we see a big jump in this past fiscal year. And what that tells me is we're starting to see a little bit of backup where we've got all these permits coming in that were relatively steady, obviously a little bit of a jump, but now we have this really big jump of what's in process, meaning more stuff's coming in the door than we're getting out the door now. So we've got to take a look and how do we fix that? And some of it has been staffing, some of it's been Caldor. When Caldor happened, our building department in particular kind of dropped everything to help out with that, including inspections of all the home sites in Caldor. So that was part of the cause there. But that is something I'm now looking into, and how do we fix that? And I'll talk about fixes in a little bit. So the next slide then shows how many permits actually were completed during that fiscal year. And here we see a relatively steady number. So again, that tells me, we've got this little bit of bottleneck where more's coming in. We're getting about the same amount out because we've got the same amount of staff. We've got the same process. So we're getting the same amount out, but we're starting to see this back up. So how do we want to address that? So then the next slide, just some additional information, more kind of as an FYI. Building inspection stops, and we have over 32,000 for the calendar year of 2021. So all of our inspectors, all the inspections that they conduct, that's a lot. So each inspector does about anywhere from 10 to 15 inspections a day, which when you think about, 8-hour day, you're doing more than one an hour, which is pretty impressive. That is another thing I'm looking at though, because our building inspections, we are getting, ideally, when someone calls and says, hey, I need a building inspection, we want to do that in 1 to 2 days. Right now, we're running at about a week, about 7 days, and that's not good because we know that means there's a construction crew there waiting to do the next thing. So that is something we're definitely working on as a high priority. The next slide, the staffing, that just shows we've been pretty steady. We've added, 1 or 2 folks over the past few years, but it really has not been quite enough to keep up with the increased volume that we've seen. The one thing we have to keep in mind though, because I was around in 2008 and that time frame, we don't want to get into a situation where we're having to lay off people because now the economy has changed and we're just not building at the pace that we were. And we're kind of at that point, it feels a little bit like that time frame where we're starting to see the sales go down, the demand starting to cool off a little bit. So not enough to really change our staffing needs right at the moment, but I want to be conservative. I want to see what's going to happen before I add a lot of additional staff. And then just one more piece of information on the next slide is our walk-in customers to our permit center. And this is not only building, this is planning questions. This is even sometimes Department of Transportation questions, environmental management questions. But for the most part, when folks walk in, it's usually building staff that are staffing that front counter and taking in those questions. So we get about over 13,000 people now coming in on an annual basis to get help and ask questions of our staff. All right, so next slide shows you then what we're doing. What are our next steps? So first and foremost, we are looking at adding contract, building plan check, and inspection help. This is the way to solve a problem. If you've got a high volume now, but I don't know what it's going to look like a year from now or 2 years from now. I don't want to lay anybody off. So let's see if we can get contract help to do that. It's always a little bit challenging, but most jurisdictions around here use contract help. That's the way to address a good part of that problem. So we are in the process of putting together the process, the RFP and so forth that we need to get contract help. We are adding some additional staff, particularly up in Tahoe. We used to have more building staff up in Tahoe when COVID hit and that office shut down. That staff came back down the hill, and just due to people leaving and so forth, we just have never put staff back up there. We have one building inspector up there. We're going to be adding a couple of more staff up there because people need to have someone they can go in and talk to and have a face-to-face conversation with when they have questions or issues, particularly in Tahoe when there's TRPA regulations that add a whole nother layer to the process. So we are actively, we have the positions, we have done interviews, we're going to start filling those positions. And then we also we've had a lot of extra help positions, which are part-time positions. The problem is we've had a heck of a time filling those positions. Couple of reasons. One is everybody's having labor problems and filling positions regardless, let alone part-time positions. And then even when we do, they tend to be people that in a few months, when a full-time position opens up somewhere else in the county, then they go over and take that full-time position. So I am taking the salary from a lot of those unfilled extra help positions. And it takes about 4 or 5 extra help positions to equate to one full-time permanent position, but it's still worth it just to get that person in the door. So we're doing that as well. The other big piece is we've got Track It, which we talked about a little bit earlier, our system for people to get permit information or when they submit a permit. When we internally are sharing information, Track It is the system that we use. It's been around for a while, but it's never lived up to its full potential. But IT and our department have made a renewed commitment to make sure we maximize the use of that because it can be a big time saver, not only for our customers, but for staff as well. So we're working on that. And then just we need to start looking and looking at metrics, looking at those turnaround times, and really make sure that the changes that we're making as we're making process improvements, that it's really actually helping and reducing those time frames. So we'll start monitoring that as well. Next slide, I'm going to start talking about the planning side, and I won't spend as much time here, only because there haven't been any dramatic of changes in planning as there has been in building. And we have seen an increase in planning applications over time. There was a big jump, as you see, from fiscal year 2019-20 to 2020-2021. That is primarily because we added the vacation home rental program. So we saw that big jump just pretty much due to that. Otherwise, it's been pretty steady. The next slide shows, again, that snapshot in time of how many are in process. And you see a bigger number here because planning projects do take longer. Whereas building, obviously a water heater, that's something that can be done over the counter or at least in a day. A lot of the building permits are a matter of days, if maybe perhaps weeks, except for the largest. Planning is a whole different thing. A lot of planning projects take a long time, so you will see more that are in process comparatively to the number of applications that come in. The next slide shows those that are approved. And again, you see a big jump that again is mainly due to vacation home rentals because that is one of the few permits we process that we can do relatively quickly. So we do see a big jump. But that also does reflect a few other things of starting to get our planning department staffing a little more filled than what we've had. We still have some key positions we need to fill, but we are starting to chip away and work at that backlog of permits and planning. The next slide shows planning staffing, and you will see a little increase here. And thank you to the Board of Supervisors over the past couple of years. They have listened, they have recognized the need and have added staffing to planning. Some of that's been in our long-range planning, where it's very much needed as we work on things like design guidelines for the community, or when the state tells us, hey, you now have to treat accessory dwelling units differently than you did before, and you need to modify your ordinance to reflect that. That falls into our long-range planning bucket, and we have a lot of projects there that we're working on. All right, so then the next slide talks about planning next steps, and here too, like I said, we're really trying to fill some key vacancies. Probably the hardest one that we've had the most trouble with is our senior planner, which is a very well-paid position. I mean, it's $100,000 a year, so it's hard to imagine we can't fill that position, and we've even had incentives, but we are starting to fill that. Whereas before I had 6 of 8 senior planner positions vacant at one point or another, we now are down to, I think we've got 3 we need to still fill. But that's a key position because that is our journey level person who knows a thing or two about planning and can process a lot of different types of planning projects. So we really need to get those last few filled. We're getting our new staff. We do have a lot of new staff. We're getting them trained and up to speed. Same with building. We're continuously trying to identify process improvements, and then not only identify what needs to be done, but then put a very specific plan and timeline in place for making those changes, maximizing the use of Track It, and monitoring our processing times as well. So I think that's it, and happy to answer any questions that you have.
Again, I'll invoke my privilege since I have a microphone. Thank you again for coming tonight. You know, that story was, you know, I did see the presentation of the board. I thought it was rather compelling because, you know, a lot of people don't have that mindset of what it takes to have things like a water heater replaced, or, you know, or even a big development project. So it was interesting to see that. And then it was in the newspaper as well. And I think it was a good article, but I don't think people got the full sort of sense of what the presentation was. So I appreciate you coming tonight to talk to us. I did want to point out, and correct me if I'm wrong, that when we're talking about Tahoe, we're not talking about the city of South Lake Tahoe. We're talking about the area around South Lake Tahoe and, you know, inside of California. So they have their own planning process there, and I'm sure they're as deluged as everyone else because they've taken a big hit. And then my question, since on Track It, is that so it's changed since it was first implemented. You know, people, when they want to go in there and look at a project or look at a permit, for us, we're in there looking at development projects. But you have to have a user account, you have to be signed in, or you can't really get all the file attachments. And then I know that when the planning department sends out like an NOP for whatever, or for a hearing at the planning commission, and they'll say it's in Track It, here's a link to Track It, but you have to go in and search for it. I've been able to, if you're logged in, there is a variable in the URL where you can throw in, you know, I think it's active server, I can't remember. But you can throw in a variable at the end and put a project number in, it'll go right to the project if you're logged in. So that's the thing that we've struggled with as we're looking for, and that and the consistency with, for development projects, how information is entered in. Sometimes you could search by a developer name, sometimes a project name, sometimes it doesn't match with what the developer has told us, or so there are elements of Track It, but if it could be leveraged in, I mean, we've already invested in it. But yeah, if there's a way to make it more accessible for public review, to go in and look, I think that would probably benefit a lot of people, and maybe you won't get as many phone calls asking, what is the, that's just one element for me. So I'm gonna look real quick and see if I have any hands up in here.
I'll say, while we're looking, just to respond, most of our inquiries often are planning related. I mean, not many people care if their next door neighbor's putting in a water heater or whatever. Sometimes they do. But I am looking at combining some of the capabilities of GIS and our planning information, maybe giving folks another way other than having to create a login and go, kind of randomly search, try and find something by project name. Another jurisdiction I worked in did it this way, where what I'd like is for our residents to be able to go online. They see a map of the county, or maybe it's by district. When they pull it up, it's got pins on it for all the current projects. You click on that pin and up pops the project information, a copy of the application, a copy of the elevations and the site plan that were submitted as part of that application project. The address, you have all that information. And in the jurisdiction I worked in previously, they did that pretty much right after they got that application. As soon as it was deemed complete application, that information would go out. So even if the project, may change down the road between what was originally submitted and what finally gets approved when it goes through all the process, but it's out there for everybody to see as soon as possible. And I think that would be helpful.
I know that a few years ago, the fire department had, I think, I don't know if they demoed it, if it's still live, but there was a similar application where it was a GIS type thing. You'd go and look and say, oh, look, there's, Hawkview. There's whatever project was, you click on it, would give you the basics. It wasn't super detailed, wouldn't give you to planning documents. I'm pointing at you, please, fire board member, but you're just over there where I'm pointing. So yeah, it was a little unique. I would love to, I was, oh, well, how can we do that with just the information that we maintain? And it's just, when we want the information to be correct, and the things change. So it's a struggle for us just to keep links to current information available. A lot of times with the old systems, things would just disappear and not be there anymore. So that's why we started downloading the actual documents and storing them on our web server as well. So that'd be great, a great tool. I think the community would see some value in that.
That program was called Development Snapshot.
Thank you. Yes. Yes, without question. So, but it was unique. It was unique. It was nice to see a visual. I think it would make it easy for people who don't know a developer name, the project name, the APN, the things like that. So before I turn it to everyone else, and I know that we talked about Heritage Park, because that was one of the questions that the community had sent in, and I provided to you in advance to know that they were asking about it. And the other one was, and again, it's got to be high level because I don't think you can get to the details right now because we've taken too much of your time. Concerning the environmental planning document for the Crescent Creek Preserve, and that there are some things in there that are different from what was seen with the original heritage with the EIR for Crescent Creek, and then impacts on other projects that are citing it. Is there anything you could touch on briefly for that, or?
Yeah, that is a complicated one, but I'll try and explain. So the document that you're referring to is a document that was required because of their permit through Army Corps of Engineers. And so if you look at the document, it actually has nothing to do with the county per se. That it's not a document for the county. It wasn't required by the county. It was when we went through the process approval, one of the things I had to do was get a permit from Army Corps of Engineers. Army Corps of Engineers said, you need to do these reports, and I don't even know how often they require them. That looks at the things that they care about. So that document is not one that the county has or looks at or requires or needs. But I guess in short, it's kind of working the way it's supposed to. So we condition a project, you get the Army Corps of Engineers, they require follow-up reports to look at the health of what they care about. And that's what that report shows, is it's an update. And so it is specific to that project though. So it does not really apply when you're looking at, say, Central Eldorado Hill specific plan or something else. It'll go through, it's required to go through a similar process because it's an assessment of the open space and the health of the open space and how do we preserve the open space. So it's going to be a similar process, but there was one a similar process was done for Central Eldorado Hill specific plan as part of their environmental document. It's very likely, I couldn't say, looking at the details, because I haven't gone into that depth with that question in mind, but it's very likely they have to get an Army Corps of Engineer permit as well. And it's very likely down the road, they're gonna have the same report that, was mentioned, done to look at how's it working? How is the health of this? And, are we seeing the very species we're trying to protect, are we seeing them? And in the case of that report, they said, yes, we do see those species there. So to me, that's showing it's working, what the requirements were for these projects is working.
I know that we had incorporated that in our findings for Central, just because what they had cited in terms of specific fauna, wildlife, was sort of in conflict with the document that they had worked on with Central. And I'm not seeing, am I seeing hands up? I saw, no, it's just, I'm not seeing them on my screen. Well, let's do the room, and Robert has his hand up, but John's here, and then we're gonna jump right out. So John, you're on. You're on.
A question, what is the actual procedure, like when Heritage says they want to build? What's the procedure at the building department with Heritage? How do they proceed? Like, what do they look at? How deep do they look into their plans?
Not sure I understand. So you're talking about they come in and say, I'm now ready to build this specific commercial building.
Oh, let's say that Heritage, Lenore comes to you and says, we want to build another 1,000 homes in this particular location. What is the procedure now that the building department does in relation to those plans? I mean, how deep do you look at them? What do you look at?
Well, the building department is just looking at the building code. But when those plans are submitted to building, they are not the only ones necessarily looking at them. They still circulate those plans, even for a building permit, to planning. So planning will go back and look at all the conditions of approval that were approved for that project, and all the ones that planning is responsible for. They make sure those still, or that those are adhered to and taken into consideration.
How does that process begin? Specific plan, it could be project specific. In the case of Heritage, they recently had.
Heritage too.
Yeah,
So it is an amendment of the specific plan.
correct. So there was a specific plan in place, the board of supervisors involved with reviewing an amendment to it. That was approved, it was then authorized to move forward. But in general, any given subdivision starts with contacting the planning department and saying, basically letting them know they want to start a project to build X number of homes on these parcel numbers, et cetera, et cetera. Then that discussion leads into hopefully a project submittal, typically recorded and tracked, if I understand it right. That may be one of the latter sequences. Karen can give you more detail on the front end part of it, but it starts with somebody saying, hey, I want to build some homes, and here's what I'm planning on doing. And then it gets into what kind of a planning mechanism are you going to use? How big is the project? There's a lot of things that fall into that sizing category of what you can and can't do. Some things, specific plans are generally recommended, they're preferred by the developer, gives them an extended period at which to operate things, gives them still a lot of flexibility doing their mapping, pluses and minuses to that. It can come in different ways, but maybe give John some insight on the overall.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
Is that enough? Okay.
Yeah, and it's not, I think, functionally different from what we see when a project comes in. They either have a pre, they talk about it, then it's a pre-app, and then there's an application, but I think John was pretty accurate with what we've seen, so. Yeah. Yeah, mitigated, yeah.
Could John have his microphone back?
Oh, there you go. Thank you, Joel. Yeah, so if you want to, basically, if you want to restate your point about the EIR.
My point was that initially in that whole process of processing a project application, the CEQA determination is pretty much right up front, and it has to be decided whether the project is either exempt from the requirements of CEQA or an EIR, or it does need an EIR. And a project of 1,000 units typically does require something like an EIR.
Exactly. There's a whole process, starts with the initial study and then goes into what are the details and is it CEQA compliant by its category, by the size of it and stuff? And there's various trigger points you look at in terms of what really dictates a full EIR versus a mitigated negative deck. So you're exactly right. But that's pretty difficult to show, even in a decision tree diagram in terms of, it can be very, very complicated in terms of which branch you take for a given condition. So, yeah.
Who did I miss in the room? Another question? Was there another one? Okay. So Robert's been waiting with his hand up. Robert, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, actually, let me clarify, Karen, with regards to where the question was developed, basically about the Carson Creek Pacific Plan and the now 25-year-old negative declaration. We became involved with the Central Eldorado Hills Central Pacific Plan evaluation, 6 months ago, bringing forward new information with regard to biological findings that was commissioned by Lennar Homes that very, very definitely and unequivocally shows that the negative declaration needs to be updated, and that your senior planner, Gina Hamilton, who's been wonderful working with, indicated she never saw that report either. So basically, my question to you would be going forward, not tonight, obviously, but to be able to go down and sit down for both the Central Plan and the Carson Creek Pacific Plan to reevaluate whether or not it is appropriate, based upon this new biological set of findings, to re-examine and open up a new CEQA for those two Pacific plans. And so I would really enjoy the opportunity to chat with you directly going forward on that issue.
I won't spend too much time on it, but I'll just say that was the report you're talking about was not a report that comes to the county or is required by the county. It's an Army Corps report, and it's specific to that project. I
understand that report was generated for that purpose. However, the findings are still applicable to your review of whether or not a CEQA is applicable or not. That especially since back in August of 2021, the supervisors approved 409 new homes by Lennar based upon information that was not presented to the county supervisors at that point. And it's conceivable that that decision might have been different had they had that information. So basically what we're saying, whether or not it's Lennar or Parker or anybody else, if you're talking about further development in Carson Creek or in Valley View or Central, whatever the Pacific Plan is, that when we have new information, it really does behoove the county to reevaluate its CEQA standing, especially if you're relying on data that now is 25 years old and dubious at best at this stage. So I would, again, like to open the door to chat further. And again, this is not the proper forum for it. So thank you for hearing me out.
That's an opportunity for perhaps on the road to have a more informed conversation that's very specific to what Robert and his neighbors are looking at. So if there are no more questions.
Well, John, it also applies to the Central Plan and everything that you brought forth on the Parker development and a golf course thing too. So they're all tied together.
Okay, then we'll say residents. We'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and recirculated draft EIR is usually the tool that starts that process because there's new findings or there's new requirements passed down from the state. VMT was one of those things that in the Central case, they had to do a recirculated draft EIR to consider what that new requirement was, vehicle miles traveled, where before it was all based upon level of service numbers. So those are the kinds of tools that planning uses to make sure that new information gets out there. But typically, there has to be some significant new finding. For instance, cultural resources. If somebody finds something in excavating their backyard that wasn't found before, yeah, that might trigger the need to go back in to do an RDEIR for cultural resources. But those kinds of situations are generally few and far between, but they can happen. But that's a new finding that requires it, as opposed to a new law that now is required, or change to an existing law that requires it. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Thank you. So, so I'm seeing hands on the screen behind me, but I'm not seeing any in any of these screens here. So I have two screens that say yes and one screen behind that says no. So if I'm missing your question, but we've monopolized Karen's time tonight. She's participated a lot further than I sort of suggested that she would be doing tonight. And we appreciate you coming down here, spending a night with us and doing this. We'd love to schedule these earlier, but then we don't get resident participation. So thank you for being here tonight. It's very informative in terms of the process because county staff handles a lot of things. You know, we're a small county in terms of residents, we're a large county in terms of size, geography, and it's varied from one end to the other, from lower elevation to higher. So thank you so much for providing that information just tonight. So with that, I guess I'm going to jump over to this one and we'll, Tim, you're going to be up here. So Tim White, Vice Chair APAC, there's a laundry list of things that Tim does, if you must now. Let me go ahead and I'll share this screen. Let's see, here we go, sorry. There. Ta-da. So here we go, Tim. What don't you do, Tim? Okay, so he's a master gardener as well. So he's a vice chair here in APAC. He's a former chair of APAC. He's an elected member of the fire department board of directors. He's a LAFCO commissioner for Eldorado County, and he's currently serving as a District 1 alternate on the Charter Review Committee. So Tim's going to talk to us tonight about that. So now it's just back to the room. Discuss at your leisure.
I'll make it very quick. Every 5 years, each charter county in California, about 14 of them, there's 58 counties in California, if you remember your California history, about 14 are charter counties, the rest are general law counties. The charter counties are required every 5 years. The Board of Supervisors of those counties have to set up a charter review committee to take a look at the county's charter. That's basically your sort of constitution, high level, how the county should be run. They rank, Eldorado's is about 14 pages. City and County of San Francisco is 549 pages. So, they can be very detailed or they can be more broadly drafted. So we had a charter review committee 4 years ago in 2017-18. The Board of Supervisors in June of this year established another one for the 22-23 timeframe. Any recommendations that we make to the Board of Supervisors, and if they approve to put it on the ballot, will probably be either June of 2024 or November of 2024, and that's really the discretion of the Board of Supervisors. But the Board of Supervisors asked us to look at 6 specific things, and some of you who were here probably previous years, you'll say, didn't we just vote on that and make a decision? Well, they've asked us to look at the vote again, and it's also an opportunity for groups, individuals, whatever, to say, hey, I've looked at the charter, I think maybe you should look at certain areas. So I'm just going to briefly cover some of the main ones that the Board of Supervisors have asked us to look at, and then in addition, some of the ones and some of the groups that may be requesting the board or the Charter Review Committee to look at some of the other suggestions that they or their groups will sponsor. So first and foremost, we had a meeting just last Monday night, and we looked at, we had several things on our agenda, one of which was staggering terms for elected department heads. Right now, Eldorado County has 7, besides the Board of Supervisors, the board has 7 elected officials: assessor, tax collector, sheriff, DA, surveyor, clerk recorder. They are all elected currently in the gubernatorial election year. So earlier this year, we had our June primary. Basically, all our county officials were elected. A new law was passed by the Senate, the Assembly and the Senate earlier this term. The governor signed it about 2 weeks ago. It's called Senate Bill 759. That will now require that the elections for sheriff and district attorney be held in presidential elections and not gubernatorial elections. And the current newly elected sheriff will take office in a couple of months, and our DA person, they will get a 6-year term. So we voted in 2022 June. They were elected, but they will not have a 4-year term. They will have a 6-year term. And in 2028, they have that off, come up to the election, and every 4 years after that. So, Board of Supervisors have to look at that. California law basically took that out of our committee's hands, but we can look to see if we should add maybe the assessor or the auditor or some other official. So we'd have 4 elected officials in one cycle and then 3 on the other. So that's something that's being looked at and discussed, and if you have input or ideas on it, please let the Charter Review Committee know. Another thing we're looking at, again, with the direction of the board, is to maybe consolidate some elected department heads. There's one county in the state of California that elects a surveyor. Guess what? It's Eldorado County. Why do we elect a surveyor? It goes back to the gold rush days when basically if you elected a surveyor, he or he, they could determine where the lines were. And if the lines were drawn correctly, maybe that gold mine was suddenly in your part of the property and not someone else's who thought it was in their property. But we've continued that tradition for 150 plus years. So there are other counties, many other counties combine a tax collector, recorder, clerk recorder. There's are maybe efficiency in doing so. Maybe there isn't. We're going to do we have to do a deeper dive to determine whether it makes sense to do, whether that's something that's part of the that we maybe put on a ballot going forward. But I think it's an interesting topic because, again, we elect more county positions than the other. 2 other big ones coming up. We didn't get them. Our meeting ran over and we had to delay these to the next November meeting. Is changing the number of members of the Board of Supervisors. We currently have 5 districts, 5 supervisors, staggered terms. It has been suggested that we look at increasing the number of supervisors from 5 to 7. One of the questions I asked and want some research done on how much does it cost to have a supervisor. I can tell you what their salary is. I know they have some administrative assistants and they have a office budget. So if you go from 5 to 7, that will obviously increase the cost of that. What is perceived efficiency if you increase? Why is 7 supervisors going to make it more efficient? A lot of county residents talk to the supervisors because it makes more sense. Again, every other county in California, with the exception of the city and county of San Francisco, which has 11 members of the Board of Supervisors, every other one has 5, and that's LA, which is 10 million residents, and every other county, Alpine, which has 10,000 residents. So why should we be different? Maybe we should be. I don't know. But that's the kind of feedback we want from the community. That would you rather, if you're living in Cool, would you rather have a group that just represents parts of Cool and not be grouped in with a very large geographic area of District 4? I mean, yeah, we have to look at this. And finally, another major one is we Board of Supervisors act to look increase the Board of Supervisors. Currently, they are 4-year gigs. They're appointed, they can be continued for like fall. We've been asked to look at this to increase 3 terms to 12 years. And looking at it, what kind of happens is many counties do not have limits on supervisors, and those supervisors are the ones that they serve 20 or 22 years. All the various committee positions that county supervisors on, regionally, statewide, those supervisors, typically a lot of these committees, here, we want to get leadership positions on those committees, councils, stuff like that. Our supervisors, just about the time that they're 8 years in, without really being vice chair, somebody that turned out, we have to start down at the bottom again, and we have to get vice to those leadership positions. That's an argument to be why we do it, but a lot of arguments are approaches. We want to hear the others reaction. So another thing is we're looking at 8 minutes, 8 years term. It's good for one supervisor. Finding a term rate, some of the problems of others. We've had times in districts that have been about 25, 30 years. Our former tax collectors have left 8 terms, 32 years. More supervisors are determined appropriately with other elected officers. So that's some of the things we specifically target. So we're looking at others. At the meeting, a representative taxpayer association is there. Each state is there. They will have responses for questions and comments on everyone that discussed. They also then, they have to do one that we haven't heard about yet. They have to go through their process and approve it. So then we can bring it back. We meet the second Monday every month. 14th, 5 o'clock, Board of Supervisors, chambers up in Placerville. And we're hoping, haven't been given a deadline yet, but I think we would like to get everything done and get it to the Board of Supervisors, maybe like in May or June of 2023, which gives enough time to get everything.
Ballot, yeah.
Get the ballot. Quick. Any questions? Yes, sir. We, District 1, Supervisor Heidel, but we also have District 2, Turnbow. He has the Eldorado Hills, the Four Seasons, and Heritage.
South of 50.
South of 50. And
Really depends on what you define Eldorado Hills to be, right? That's a 95762 designation. There's 3 supervisors that have some jurisdiction within that zip code. But if you look at other boundaries, other than that, you get different answers, right? So there is no real definitive answer for what constitutes Eldorado Hills.
Based on a ballot coming to my house, based on the street, is there 3 different presidents elected?
I can only vote for one.
No, I know. Where I live is one.
Right.
Every house
So, yeah.
has one to vote for, but
Yeah. So like,
based on that 95762,
Where I live is one.
you can get, I could vote for you in line, I could vote for the supervisor 2, and then somebody in.
Right here on the other side.
Malcolm Dixon, North of Green Valley,
And
along that, this is 4.
That's part of the.
Yeah, so it's a really small piece.
Right. We could all be Eldorado Hills residents, or that's what we claim, right? But yet we have separate supervisors that represent us, depending upon where we live.
The biggest part is fine. I'm already blanking on the numbers. Was it 38,000? What was it?
Yeah, it's 37,600 or something. So 38,000 is close.
38,000 per
Yeah.
district, divided by 5. They get the census data, divide it up. Well, how are you gonna figure it out? We went through a big dang deal, going through that process and trying to see, there were some odd things where, the county staff did a really good job with, it's kind of hard to get your arms around it. There were some versions of maps where the split between districts was a homeowners association transferred to 2 subdivisions. But as a community, you have the same sort of interests and so, but you've got to get to something that's equitable in terms of population, because that's what the law is. So, so I know that the discussion about 7 supervisors came up during the redistricting process. So there's some thought behind that too, when you talk about Congress or the Assembly, when you have gridlock, sometimes gridlock's a good thing. You don't get some wacky things happening and you get things debated rather well. But then again, if you need to get something done, it's hard to get 7 people to, agree to a majority position, so.
But it's one major, they're kind of like this. Those districts, they tie into the center here, but then you have to reach out, so it goes like this. So when you
A
have
hub and
equal
spoke.
population.
So So, and I know that, gosh, I want to say it was in the late nineties. We just, it had to be 2000. I'm thinking that's when that was some of the variations that they talked about. What if, there were stripes going east-west instead of blocks north-south? So, but and you have to get those population numbers. And so the consideration is like, my cousin's in Somerset, right? And one of the variations of what we proposed for the redistricting earlier this year was, well, she would have been in my district, or I would have been in her district. Well, we have nothing really in common, other than the fact that, we have to draw a line somewhere, so it's tough. So that's what they're exploring, but then again, I thought that's rather thoughtful to, well, what's it cost to have a supervisor? What's it cost to do the election? What's it cost to? So there might be benefits, but so the review committee analyzes it, they can't provide, a thoughtful response to that. So it'll go back to the supervisors and you got something to say?
I have a question to Tim. Going up to Placerville might be very inconvenient for people down here. Do they contemplate using a Zoom perhaps to let people participate who are not, who can't go up to Placerville?
We have been doing our meetings.
You do?
Yes, we do. And if you go to the county supervisor site, they have board of supervisors, planning commission, they have all the various on the calendar. If you look at charter review committee, and then you look at the agenda, and then you get the Zoom instruction letters.
Oh, okay.
So the Zoom link is right there, actually in the list.
Okay. All right. I think that's a big help. Thank you, Tim.
You can actually go in and subscribe to say, I want to see all of the planned meetings for the Charter Review Committee, right? And that's all you'll get is when those come up. So, or you can click multiple things.
Yeah, and it's like this meeting, we have some people here in person, we have a few people online. The Zoom has made a difference in terms of, there's a little more participation, so it's nice to have that available to residents that, they're getting home taking care of kids. I know in the meeting on Monday, there were very few people there in person. I was there virtually. I had nothing to say, if you can believe that. But, it's.
That's the truth. You had nothing to say?
Well, nothing you can hear.
But,
Oh.
it's funny. There was myself, I'm an alternate, so I'm not sitting up at the top because our district one representative, Richard Ross, I know, maybe you know Richard, on the Supervisor Highland's Community Council and fairly active in the community. He's the main guy. There was someone from the Taxpayers Association, whose name is, I have it here, I have it written down. And then we had two elected officials. We had our clerk recorder and we had our tax collector, who had just spoken at the
Council meeting.
That was it. And it was maybe 4 or 5 people on the meeting.
Yeah, and so they were talking about different elements, if we talk about those 7 elected positions, do you think that they might want to provide some feedback to this process as it's their elected position that's being considered either maybe, is it appropriate, should it be consolidated, should it not be an elected position and just be a board appointed position? You would think that they'd want to provide that feedback. And I know that when we had, the tax collector was here at community council and she provided some very good feedback when Richard had asked. And so there's a bit of a dialogue and maybe they don't agree, but it's good to hear it. They need to hear it. And that's got to be part of their consideration. So if there's any questions for Tim, it's an easy meeting to attend when you go in and it's conducted with county staff there to help. The clerk's office is there to help them out. So it's well run and they're thoughtful and they speak to each other and you can hear it all. So thank you, Tim, for that. So I guess we'll jump ahead. I jumped ahead too far. We have one more item tonight that we're going to talk about. Let me get to it, sorry. Okay, share. There it is. All right. Sure. So, area projects that APAC has been reviewing or anticipates reviewing. We've been talking about this last few times. We've missed, I want to say 3 meetings this year. Mostly because there's nothing new to talk about and we don't want to get people out. We want to be thoughtful about how we do it. And if there's nothing new to talk about, there's nothing new to talk about. And we'd rather everybody spend the time at home or doing the things they enjoy. So it's a pretty basic list. They're all on our website right now. We have the Central Eldorado Hills project, which a specific plan, which was the status right now is that the Planning Commission recommended denial 5-0 in June. It's pending some action that might go to the Board of Supervisors. I know that there's discussions between county staff and the applicant to see what they can do to, maybe provide a different finding to the supervisors to make the project more beneficial and overcome some of the objections of the Planning Commission. But there's no official word of anything right now. So the other item too is Costco EH 52 right there at Silver Valley Parkway and Highway 50. We did have a project presentation from them. I want to say it was in July of last year. And there was a virtual scoping meeting in September. They issued their notice of preparation of their draft environmental impact report in August. The e-traffic status right now just shows that it's in processing. I know they have discussions because there are departments at the county, transportation I think is one, that are saying, hey, we have some concerns about how your project is being submitted. And there's discussions about how they're going to modify it, and then they'll get deep into the environmental work. They have committed to come back here when they have something, either when the draft EIR comes out or when they have something that they need to discuss with the community. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, that project has been absolutely quiet for a year.
The central project was quiet from 2016 to 2019, 2020. No.
Oh, yeah, there's nothing new with Costco. The EDH 52 part of it, they are talking about a different project approach. And so that's delaying some of the processing, and I don't know if they're going to go with that or not, but
We don't know about
discussions, yeah.
They haven't run it past,
Until they get to the point of saying, yeah, this is what we want to do, they're still investigating various options.
The other aspect to keep in mind with all development projects is right now, interest rates are killing how people finance their projects, whether it's a bond or whether it's so. When they have something that they're ready to run with, we'll hear about it. But I think there's a lot of opportunity for the community to contribute to that conversation of some of the impacts that I know the school district, the school specifically, parents have. There's a lot to talk about. So when they come back, they'll hear from us, whether they want to or not. So the Creekside Village Specific Plan right now in Track It, that's a project at the south end of the business park, relatively flat piece of property, which is rare. It was de-annexed out of the business park. They came and talked to us, I think 3 or 4 times over the last 3 or 4 years. They had issued their notice of preparation of a draft environmental impact report in November 2020. They held a virtual scoping meeting the same month. The Track It shows that it is on hold right now. So I know that they had talked with the Eldorado CSD about 50 acres of land for parkland dedication, and CSD would buy some, they would be dedicating some. So but right now, it's just on hold. They do still have their marketing website up. Carson Creek Village, which is another presentation, it was a pre-application hearing. It was in February 2021. They also came, that was a virtual meeting back then. They did present to APAC, and it's just sort of their initial look at it. It's where the Tractor Supply store is being built right now. Tractor Supply store is part of their retail part of their specific plan if it gets approved. And they're talking it's high density, some apartments, but that might be different by the time it actually comes back. There's no application yet. Town and Country Village, Eldorado, which is the Mahana family project at Bass Lake Road and Country Club Drive alongside Highway 50. They've been tremendously generous with their time. They've talked to us outside of meetings. They've talked to us at meetings. They've invited us to come down and look as a sort of workshop with the things we think about, asking what community residents are thinking in the Bass Lake area. I understand they're still going through the process, that there might be some news soon and how they want to proceed, but the project pre-application to the Board of Supervisors, where they said, hey, this is what we're presenting. What do you think? They got their feedback. That was in July of 2021. I'm sorry, October 2021, and E-Track It shows that it's pending. Generations at Green Valley, which is the old Dixon Ranch project that was denied in 2017 at the Board of Supervisors. They had posed, we had talked to them afterwards. They came back to APAC and said, hey, we've never had a project denied. We're working on how we can change this to make this more consistent and compatible with the community and address community concerns. We talked to them outside of an APAC meeting. We talked to them at the APAC meeting where they shared that information with our APAC members in the audience. They've submitted an application. I've had some emails with them. They said, yeah, when we're ready to talk, we'll come and talk to you. But right now, E-Track, it shows they're project is, the status is incomplete, meaning they haven't, some of the documents either weren't adequate to what's being submitted right now, or they need to do some other items or housekeeping on how they proceed, but it is a project application. So the Marble Valley specific plan, Lime Rock Valley specific plan, combines about 4,000 homes proposed south end of Bass Lake Road. There was a notice of, for the preparation for the draft environmental impact report scoping meeting for both projects. In 2012, the meeting numbers, the project numbers have changed now to 2014 for some reason. But again, those notices went out and they're working on the draft EIR, and there's been nothing in literally in 10 years. So for the community to see in terms of what's going on. Summer Brook, which Tim and I just talked to them on the phone the other day. It's an old project approved in 2007, 2008. They've had a couple of changes to the project. It's like 29 homes. It's on Green Valley Road, right across from the middle school there at Pleasant Grove. So they had a condition of approval to build a traffic signal at the intersection of Deer Valley, at the entrance to Green Springs Ranch on Green Valley Road. So they have a study from the county transportation department that said that, hey, that it's a warranted, that was a condition of approval, but that traffic condition, the warrant doesn't exist anymore that justifies putting a traffic signal in. So that's what they told them. The new owners, Blue Mountain Communities, bought the project, and they came in and they said, well, we don't build a traffic signal, but it's still in the approvals. So now they said, hey, well, we don't want to build that. We'll contribute our fair share to when it's eventually built, which is significantly less than, yeah, so.
A traffic signal costs about $1.5 million. They don't want to contribute $1.5 million. They even said, they told John that if they had to do this, they'd probably abandon the project after they've done all the grading, the road work, and everything else.
All the underground, everything's done.
I don't think they would. The problem I have philosophically is these conditions of approval are done at a certain time. The developer says, okay, I'll agree to anything just so I can start building, within reason. It was agreed to. Now, they may have bought the project, they didn't know about it, but it's a condition of approval. Now they're asking the county to give up $1.5 million traffic light, and they'll contribute something, but it will be significantly less than $1.5 million. They're gonna come back and say, this was approved 2008?
2007, 2008.
2008. So 15 years ago, it was a condition on this approval. The county doesn't go back and say, you know what? 15 years ago, but things have changed in 15 years. We want you to do something else or something different. There's no trade-off. So unless I just say, you know what, you got to live with it, or give us something that equates to $1.5 million, the improvement, whether it's on Green Valley Road or something else, that at least it's a fair trade. Not county constantly gives up something and gets nothing back in return. All right.
The requirement was for traffic signal tax then. There isn't less traffic now.
Well,
but
DOT
Department of
says
Transportation.
their analysis shows there's no traffic warrant that would justify the installation. Part of their rationale that the developer now is saying is that it would actually be less safe to put a traffic signal.
A lot of improvements made on Deer Valley Road intersection.
Yeah.
That has reduced a lot of the accidents and near misses, and it's now operating at an LOSB, which is very low traffic volume compared to the expectation it would be LOSD with the study that was done back in 2007 or whatever it was. So things change over time, and the traffic hasn't met what they forecast it to be. And
that's a lot of projects in the Bass Lake Road area. The analysis and the study showed that based on what the development process was going to be, how people use roads at that time when they're doing the models and everything, showed that, like Bass Lake Road was going to be a 4-lane road all the way through. And in 2015, all those projects came off the CIP because those projects didn't materialize at the rate they thought they would. Therefore, there's no need for the 4-lane road. But that also lowers the TIM fee, that the developers cumulatively have to contribute. You take a project off, but there are other projects that they're paying for, they're going to have to pay into. But it does change the balance of how those things are calculated. And I know that Supervisor Heidel was in APAC. I think it was 2014, the last time that APAC looked at it. And I think you and Kathy and I can't remember, also on the subcommittee, but they had changed, they removed like a sound wall for the subdivision. Because there wasn't, I reviewed it, and APAC at the time said, hey, but we're still concerned about, because the Green Valley Road corridor study had just been completed. And there was some very specific findings the county said needed to be considered as we're developing things in the area. APAC's funding at that time was like, yeah, okay, well, we'll provide conditional support is our recommendation, but you really got to look at this Green Valley corridor study. And part of that element that we talked to the communications team that they've hired for this, and we've talked to them on many projects, and we said, hey, you know, part of that study was that, hey, the school needs to improve station to access Green Valley Road. But when Green Valley Road was improved with Green Springs Parkway, part of that, they moved the road over enough so that the easternmost driveway is unusable. If you're driving a car, they have that. So they lost one of the driveways for the school. So they asked the school to improve the circulation, but took a driveway out. So maybe there's something they can do to assist the school. Maybe there's little pieces they can do with, they're suggesting maybe some flashing signs when you come around the hill and the road and, you know, to alert people, hey, there's no traffic signal here, but the visual element, maybe there is something that it might not be $1.5 million, but it might be closer to improving something.
So I met with the representatives, Michelle Smira and
Yeah,
Craig
yeah.
Sandberg. I suggested you really need to go back and look at that Green Valley study and identify where the safety improvements that were identified in that. How can you help with those and safety improvements somewhere in that Green Valley road strip? Because that is a benefit to the county. The public should recognize that ultimately. And if you can find the right kind of projects, I think it's easier to make that transition from the traffic signal to these other safety improvements. Right. Yeah.
So there. And Chief has something to contribute.
But we have to look at that entitlement process. We struggle with that here at the fire department. When a project is approved, say in 2007, 2008, and they don't start building till 2022, there's a lot of things that have changed between then and now, including staffing, apparatus, codes, all those types of things. But whatever you agreed to or signed off on as conditions of approval, then you're kind of stuck. And so, you know, we're looking at that entitlement process and is there a way to give an entitlement process that lasts or expires in 5 years and maybe look at it then, because things change pretty quick. And some of these projects, once you sign off, you're done and you're agreeing to things that happened 15 years ago.
To your point, you know, the Silver Springs Parkway, you know, we built our home in Bass Lake area in 1995. We were looking at 94, the lot wasn't released. We're talking to them. The first thing that's closed, new Bass Lake Road going in will begin in 2 years.
Right.
God knows. Well, in 25 years later, it was in. But it wasn't the 4-lane road they talked about back then. It was a 2-lane road, and it's an improvement. Community appreciates it, but exactly, you know, it's what was promised. The county is tied to the agreement and the approvals then. But the applicant, the developer can always come back and ask for modification. The county can't ask for modification. So we're just saying when that conversation takes place, that when you're horse trading, the county has to do a very good job of being consistent with what the value, so that we're, and as Tim's talked about, you know, the reason that they looked at the analysis of that intersection was for Dixon Ranch. And the analysis at that time for Dixon Ranch, oh yeah, you don't need the signal anymore. But it was 10 years after the project had been approved that they're working on now. So my concern was, when we asked was, in our letter, it's like, so if they don't do the signal, and then Dixon Ranch has green, generations in Green Valley, they come back, it's conceivable that they're gonna have to pay for the traffic signal. Depending on, you know, what the traffic analysis shows, or part of it, or a bigger part of it. So they're the reason that they're asking for it to be taken away. If that gets taken away, they get approved for a new project. Now they're gonna end up paying for so it's all balanced. So has to provide input.
A perfect example is Bass Lake Road. We have a fire station on Bass Lake Road, and we need an emergency signal there because, you know, there's a rise and a turn, and the fire engines, they weigh 40,000 pounds. They don't move like a car. So we've had a couple of incursions where the engine's pulling out and they've almost been hit because it just takes a little time to get out there. But the development was all agreed upon years ago, so there's not even a signal light,
That's a
emergency
specific
signal
plan,
light
the
in
Bass
there.
Lake specific plan.
Yeah, like those specific plan, that was 2005 when they realigned the road.
Right.
On the other side of Hawkview, which is now, what's the name of it? I can't remember the name. North Silverdome, with the new road. So, yeah, and I think when we talked about the Country Club Road realignment at APAC.
Yeah.
For your election, that was one of the things I asked, like, is there an opportunity, I think you were on the fire board still, is there an opportunity to realign that new road, which had been there for, by then, 10 years? Can we get that to align with the fire station and put a traffic cone there? Because I asked, what would it take to even get a stop sign there? And DOT is like, well, you could have, 3 fatal accidents and not get a stop sign because it doesn't warrant it, but you could have 100 fender benders and that might warrant it. So, when that was approved and your station was built there, there's an opportunity there to align those things, but there's so many property owners right there with driveway easements and can we take like sort of a holistic view of this and say, how can we make this when we're doing these approvals to get the best result? So all we can do is provide advisory. It's right there in the name, APAC advisory. So residents need to be vocal about it. You don't have anything to say about that?
No.
Okay, I'm shocked. I was sitting there waiting for John to chip in. So we've beaten Summerbrook up, and they've been very generous with their time. We had a great conversation with them. They know that the community is looking for something, and so whatever they come back with, we'll look at it. It was a pre-application, and there was a TAC meeting in September for Lakeside Boat and RV Storage, which is along Sophia Parkway at Green Valley Road. It's behind where another project is. I don't have it on the list for some reason. Oh, because the other one, not the self-storage, but their neighborhood retail. Yeah, so there's a retail thing that we talked about sometime. Village is at Town Center West, which is right behind like Blue Shield. There's an opportunity to make that into a mixed use sort of development. It was originally planned for a lot of commercial, a lot of some warehousing and stuff, and they come back and if their actual application, let's see if I'm remembering here. Pre-app at the board of supervisors, I'm gonna turn a lot, look, because my screen's blocked. October 2019, the application was filed. And then there was a pre-app hearing before that. But that's again gone dark and there's different owners of that project, or the organization has changed. I don't know if they've sold it completely. Oakmont, I don't know.
Oakmont, yeah.
They're a different organization now. They have new ownership.
Oakmont still owns that.
Well, they own the senior care facility, but the adjacent property,
Well, they own
well,
it's a new ownership
the
group.
parent company is called Gallagher or something or
Yeah.
other, and Gallagher
Gallagher.
owned Oakmont, but now there's a separate division of Gallagher that owns the property that used to be Oakmont. So,
I thought that was finished. I thought that
Well,
was not approved.
Well, no, they just never moved forward with it.
they did a J6, they never moved beyond the J6 conceptual. There was never a formal application submitted for it. They were going through their project description and revising that over and over again.
So the concept was a
and it
lot of
stopped.
senior rentals because we lack that here. And we are a senior community. And so that was the original concept going in. I know some of the supervisors, they were like, can it just be just rentals? And so that changed sort of their mindset. They wanted to do a lot of senior, like some medical, like a medical center, medical doctor's offices and have them
Right.
be compatible with sort of the community that they're intending to build. And so that, I think that changed their calculus. But again, everything changes, interest rates right now, what's marketable, what the demand is, what the county wants, so, and new ownership. So I think that Oakmont doesn't even own Oakmont anymore, but they operate it, senior care.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay.
They operate it, but they don't own
Yeah.
they don't own the.
And then the last thing is just an odd one. It's La Canada, Unit 1. For some reason, in June 2022, it popped up on Track It with a new tentative map number. There are no documents available there. There's zero, no attachments. Don't even know what that tentative map looks like. So there we go. So that was it. And what time is it? It's 8:16. We're going to go ahead. We'll put Rafael Martinez's video up. I apologize that it did not work tonight, but then we went on and, took advantage of Karen's kindness being here tonight to ask a lot of questions. So we're going to wrap this up. So how do you become a voting member of the Eldorado Hills Area Advisory Planning Committee? You volunteer to work on a project review subcommittee. And members here, well, we didn't know what we were doing, but the people who are ahead of us, it's a generational thing. We say, hey, and you might have a better way of looking at something. You might have expertise that we lack. We're fortunate to have several lawyers now, our APAC voting members, but you work on a project and then you're a voting member. And in fact, we didn't do the announcement. Robert Williams worked on Central. He's a voting member now. Alistair Dunn is a voting member of APAC. We had a couple other people that maybe because they have some professional development, their profession's development. They work on it, but they're not going to be voting members. We appreciate their contributions. You can contribute, just ask. Our emails are all on the agendas. We have contact email on the website. You can sign up for our email list to get notifications. So we're eager to have everybody contribute. We do make an opportunity for people to submit their questions in advance. We had several tonight for Raphael and a few for Karen. If you can't be here, or if you don't want to stand up in front of the meeting and ask, you can submit your comments to edhapac.comment@gmail.com by 5 p.m. on Monday before our Wednesday meeting. And then those should be related to the agenda. And with that, our next meeting is in November on the 9th. I don't know that we're going to have much to talk about, but we do need to identify our officer candidates for the election that we will hold in December. So, this is a two-way street. Been around.
You pointed me.
You're stuck. Sorry. But if you're interested in talking about it, helping us with the officer election in December, again, our email's on there. It's info@edhapac.org, or our individual email addresses are on the agenda. So if there are no things to go back to, hands up. Thank you everyone for being patient. We apologize to Raphael. Hope to have him back, and we will include his video presentation on our website and on our YouTube channel. So we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, John.